Hey guys, we are going to take a look at the role of manifest destiny. So this is just another component of the early republic, as we've already talked about the rise of nationalism starting in the 1820s and extending into the 1840s to 1850s. We also talked about the age of Jackson, so as he emerged in 1824 and then became president in 1828 throughout the 1830s. So also happening simultaneously is this movement westward. So as we continue to expand our borders and explore our western territory, there is going to be mass settlement in the west and acquiring of new territory. And this is going to be known as manifest destiny. So understanding manifest destiny, we're looking to expand north, we're looking to expand south, but particularly we're looking to expand west. The demand for this is believed to be our destiny. After the Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark going beyond the Louisiana Purchase to reach the Pacific Ocean, that had always been a goal for Thomas Jefferson, for the country to be able to expand from one ocean to the other. And so presidents after him are going to put an emphasis on expansion of territory. We saw that under the Monroe administration with the Adams-Onesh Treaty, securing our northern borders between Canada and the United States, our continued dispute for the Oregon Territory between Great Britain and the United States. And even further, as we will see with John Quincy Adams and even Andrew Jackson and presidents thereafter, who are going to take great strides to expand the borders of the United States. The reasons why we wanted to move west. One, we were growing agriculturally. As we saw in the early 1800s, we have a demand for products, new innovations. So we had the cotton gin, which was increasing cotton production. We see Cyrus McCormick, who makes the mechanical reaper, which is going to make wheat production in the west much greater. John Deere with his steel plow, being able to get through that tough prairie sod. So new innovations is going to increase agricultural production. We're also seeing a mass increase of immigrants coming into the United States. So in the early 1800s, we see individuals coming from Ireland and from Germany and Scandinavia, so northern and western parts of Europe. So this mass increase of immigrants coming to the country, we're going to see overpopulated cities and the desire to expand out west. We have new markets. Our industries are growing. The tariffs have been allowing American industries to grow. So we want Western ports and settlements to be able to have new markets to sell our products. We are also starting to see new markets and new trade with Asia, particularly with the country of China. So we want to establish Western harbors for us to be able to set our ships a sail to be able to conduct trade in Asia. And overall new employment, many individuals wanting to start a new life. You know, during the economic panic after the destruction of the Bank of the United States by Andrew Jackson, the economic panic of 1837 is going to encourage many settlers to abandon what they thought were the problems of the East and try to start a new life in the West. So to avoid predators, some are even going to see this as an opportunity to spread their Christian faith. We will see Methodist missionaries start to move to Oregon. We will see the Mormons looking for their sanctuary out west, but we also will see the idea of spreading democracy. So that sense of nationalism, wanting to extend that beyond the current borders of the United States and into other territories. So problem is with Western expansion, as we will see, will be the native populations. So we know under the age of Jackson that he had issued in the 1830s the Indian Removal Act, where we are going to force Native American tribes, particularly the 5 civilized tribes of the Southeast, into the Indian Territory. But there are also many tribes up in the Ohio River Valley region that are going to be pressured to move west of the Mississippi River. And one group in particular are the Sauk tribe and the Fox tribe. So Black Hawk was the chief of the Sauk tribe, and he received a vision, or essentially a prophecy, that he was to lead a rebellion against the Western settlers. So those American citizens who were putting pressure on Black Hawk from the state of Illinois and the state of Iowa to move west of the Mississippi River. So where many had assimilated or who had given in and started moving to unorganized territory, Black Hawk is going to defend their ground. So as a 4-month rebellion, As I said, started in Illinois, and it's going to spread into the Wisconsin territory. So many settlers who were moving into that region found themselves in skirmishes and fights with the local Sioux and Fox. It is going to get to the point that the Illinois militia is going to be sent out to suppress the rebellion, and they end up killing 200 Sioux and Fox Native Americans, to the point that Black Hawk is going to surrender. And so they will be forcibly removed to areas west of the Mississippi River, freeing up that land in the Great Plains region for many Western settlers who are looking to move out west and settle into the Ohio River Valley and beyond. So this is a picture here of Black Hawk. So to encourage the movement, so as we know with the American system and during the age of nationalism, one of the components was increased transportation. So we saw the introduction of steamboats. We will see eventually the introduction of the iron horse or railroads that are going to continue to move people west. But once you got to the settled territory of Missouri or Illinois, beyond that, beyond the Mississippi River, there was very little that was settled. There were very few roads or very few paths that individuals had to be able to follow to get out into those western territories. So eventually we will see trails emerge, and some of these trails emerge for different reasons. One of the most well-known and most lucrative trails was that of the Santa Fe Trail. So that started in Independence, Missouri, right near the mouth of where the Missouri River and the Mississippi River meet. And then they would head more south towards Santa Fe, New Mexico. So at this time, this was Mexican territory, not United States territory. So they were crossing borders into Mexican territory. The sole purpose was for trade, okay, to trade and find riches such as gold in New Mexico. When settlers first set out on that trail, the trail itself was about 800 miles. So every spring they would load up in Missouri with their goods in their wagons, mostly tools, weapons, some general products that they would then try to take out to Santa Fe in search of gold, silver, and fur. A lot of the wagons and the traders stayed together along the trail, especially as they got into the Kansas region, into that unorganized and Indian territory, for fear of attacks by the Apache and the Comanche. And they would work together to defend each other. But once they set sight on Santa Fe, that camaraderie went to the side, and then it was, everyone out for themselves. Who could be the first to get to Santa Fe to get the best trade deals. So once in Santa Fe, you would trade your goods, you'd take your gold and silver and fur, and you'd head back to Missouri or back to your home or territory. And so this trail is going to open up a lot of exploration and settlement out in the west. And even from Santa Fe, we're going to see individuals stay in Santa Fe and actually live in Mexican territory and then travel through what is present day Arizona and even settle all the way into California to the Pacific coast. Another prominent trail was the Oregon Trail. So this also started in Independence, Missouri. The river systems were key because since there weren't roads or railroads, the rivers were their guide. So again, starting where the Mississippi and the Missouri follow, the Oregon Trail really does follow the Missouri River for a great deal out west. It's also very replicable of the Lewis and Clark expedition. So their goal was to reach Portland, Oregon. And this was actually started by Methodist missionaries who were looking to spread Christianity and help settlers to get out west. So this is where the wagon trains, the Consaga wagons, were highly encouraged to be able to navigate across. But most people only had push carts and walked most of the way. Not everyone had those large Consaga wagons to ride in as they started to move west. The Oregon Trail could be quite brutal, trying to survive the elements, individuals making sure they had enough food. Many suffered from malaria or diarrhea, and many did not make it on their way to Oregon. Their last stop was Fort Hall, and once they got to Fort Hall, that was their last bit of, quote, civilization before they had to march across the mountains to be able to settle in the Oregon Territory. But as those got settled in the Oregon Territory, they wrote back about the lush land and the abundance of timber that's going to encourage many people to continue to move out west. Another major group that is going to be known for settling the West are the Mormons. So Joseph Smith had actually started, he and 5 others had started the Church of Latter-day Saints in New York, and they're going to start to gather a following, a religious following. Even individuals, they're going to be advertising in England itself to encourage citizens from England to immigrate into the United States to become members of the Church of Latter-day Saints. As their number started to grow, they decided to move because of some of their practices. They did face some persecution by other Protestant groups. In particular, many Protestant groups had issue with their practice of polygamy, where the Mormon men would have more than one wife. But as Joseph Smith had settled in Nuevo, Illinois, that is going to be kind of their central hub in Illinois territory. Again, as their number started to grow, they started to reach about 20,000. And this became a concern for other Protestant neighbors, that they started to print protests and print articles against the Mormons, which Joseph Smith took to heart and tried to defend the Mormons. So he went and broke into their printing stores and broke their printing presses, which then got him arrested. While in jail, an anti-Mormon group broke into the jail and murdered Joseph Smith in 1844. So fearing that the persecution had escalated to violence, the second leader of the Mormons, Brigham Young, decides to go beyond American territory, where they would be able to practice their religion freely and to set their practices up freely. So they travel along components of the Oregon Trail, but instead of heading into Oregon, they actually head a little bit more south into what is present-day Utah territory, and they decide to settle in the Great Salt Lake region along the Great Salt Lake, and are able to set up industries and timber to have a thriving city and a thriving population out in the West. And so this is a map. The blue there is showing the Lewis and Clark expedition, so the original route out west. The Santa Fe Trail there in purple, again coming out of Independence, Missouri. You'll see the Oregon Trail there in green, kind of following along some of the similar paths of Lewis and Clark over into the Oregon Territory. We will eventually see the Pony Express, so being able to get mail and information out to the Western Territories, and then after the Civil War, the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. So our first railroad that will try to connect the eastern and western coasts of the United States. So the last component to try to sound up American borders was that of the Oregon Territory. So where John Quincy Adams, as he was Secretary of State for James Monroe, was able to solve a lot of disputes along the Great Lakes, the one area that was still heavily disputed between Great Britain and the United States was that of the Oregon Territory. And so this was going to be the great fight. President James K. Polk, he was an expansionist. He wanted to see the United States expand to the Pacific Ocean. And so he campaigned under this concept of 54-40 or fight. So 54-40 was 54 degrees, 40 minutes latitude. That was the border that, for the Oregon Territory, the northern border, that James K. Polk and other expansionists wanted to be able to gain control of the Oregon Territory. At this time, Great Britain was starting to lose favor of wanting to maintain the Oregon Territory and to continue to fight for it. Part of that reason was the fur trade had started to turn down. There wasn't as much demand for beaver pelts as it once had. Also, the land in the north just wasn't suitable for agriculture, so they couldn't really find any economic gains or means to maintain that territory. Even the United States agreed that that 54-degree line of latitude really wasn't quite suitable. So they ended up peacefully in 1846 dividing it at the 49th parallel. And so agreeing to divide it at that line was how we peacefully gained the Oregon Territory, which is present-day states of Washington, Oregon, and even parts of Idaho. Now, while it was peaceful to maintain and gain those borders, not all of our expansion was going to be peaceful, particularly as we try to acquire Texas and the Southwestern Territory. That is going to cause us to go to war with Mexico. So, looking at the annexation of Texas and the war with Mexico. So Texas, some of the first individuals in Texas, Texas was a Spanish territory even after the selling of the Louisiana Purchase until Mexico wins their independence from Spain. So the first settlers there were Native Americans and Mexicans. They lived amongst each other. The Mexican citizens there were known in the Texas territory were known as Tejanos. So the Spanish had set up missions, so large land plots that would manage territory. Oftentimes Native Americans were forced to stay on the missions as laborers, so essentially as slaves. And then local forts or presidios were set up to protect those missions, especially in those northern territories of Texas, far away from the central hub of what will become Mexico City and the capital of Mexico. But the missions started to die out after Mexico had won their independence. So Mexico won their independence in 1821 from Spain, and so they were now in control of what is present-day Mexico and what is currently Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. What the New Mexican government discovered that their capital city, Mexico City, was kind of centrally located in the heart of the territory of Mexico. So being able to govern that northern province was extremely difficult because it was rather far away from the capital city and from the government. So they suffered, many Mexican settlers and citizens within that territory, they suffered from attacks of local Apache and Comanche within the territory. So Mexico actually was going to invite American settlers to settle in that territory, hoping that the more people who are settled in that territory would discourage Native Americans from attacking. So to be able to entice American citizens to move into this territory, they decided to offer large land grants at very cheap prices. So at 12.5 cents per acre, that is going to encourage many settlers, especially when they find out that the soil in Texas is very good for growing cotton and sugar, so two cash crops that were in a high demand. This is going to encourage many American citizens to go over. Now, Mexico does have their stipulations. They want American settlers to pledge a loyalty to Mexico and agree that they will obey Mexican laws, that not all American laws will apply there. They also have to observe Catholicism. So that is the official religion of Mexico, which is going to be very difficult for many American citizens, where a vast majority of American citizens were of the Protestant faith and actually quite discriminatory towards Catholics. They were also encouraged to learn and speak Spanish, to make Spanish become their native language. But what many American settlers saw, and what Mexico is going to learn, is while they agree to these terms, it's going to be very difficult for the Mexican government to actually try to enforce them. So Texas decides to fight for their independence. As more and more American citizens settle in Texas, there starts to be a growing idea that Texas should be annexed by the United States. Because the American citizens are going to start to outnumber the number of Mexican citizens and even outnumber the number of Native American citizens within the Texas territory. So John Quincy Adams, when he was president, had actually offered Mexico $1 million for the purchase of the territory, which Mexico refused. Andrew Jackson, while he was president, offered more at $5 million, and still Mexico refused to sell. And by this point, by the 1830s and into the 1840s, Mexico was regretting their idea of allowing American citizens to move into the territory, because American citizens were not upholding their end of the deal. They were not following Catholicism. They were not necessarily obeying Mexican laws, and they weren't learning to speak Spanish. They were continuing to speak English. The obeying Mexican laws, the one law in particular that American settlers were disobeying, was the fact that they were bringing their slaves. Since they were growing cotton and sugar, these large plantations needed a large labor force. When Mexico had won their independence in 1821, shortly thereafter, they abolished the institution of slavery. And so they were demanding American citizens to free their slaves within their territories. And of course, many American settlers refused to do so. So this is going to cause Mexico to close their borders, against further immigration. They don't want any more American citizens coming into their territory. But the problem that Mexico had is they didn't have enough troops. The border between Mexico and the United States at that time was quite large, and so they didn't have the manpower to secure their border, to prevent American citizens from crossing that border and coming into their territory. So the American population in Texas is just going to continue to grow. So what many local American settlers, and really as Texans, as they refer to themselves as Texans, are going to start to do is start to push for more self-government within the Texas territory. They actually send a representative, Stephen Austin, to Mexico City to talk to their president, Santa Anna, to figure out what Texans could do to get more self-government. But at this point, Santa Anna had had enough and was not going to listen to the demands of the Texans. And so this is going to force Texas to declare their independence from Mexico, and they will go to war. So Santa Anna is going to lead troops up into the northern province, and Stephen Austin is going to send word back to Texas to start to arm themselves against the Mexican military that was coming to seize control. Two major battles are going to take place. The most famous is that of the Alamo. So this was an abandoned mission, so that abandoned Spanish fort in Texas. And the Texans are going to be able to initially defend themselves against the oncoming Mexican military. However, Santa Anna will arrive with reinforcements and go around the mission and surround them, where they will destroy the vast majority of the Texas forces within the Alamo. But that destruction does not deter the Texans from ending their revolution. It actually becomes a rallying cry, the phrase, "Remember the Alamo." And so these two battles, also the Battle of Goliad, is going to be Mexican victories. But they are just winning the battles. It's not necessarily winning the war. Eventually, Sam Houston will lead Texan troops, and they will win their independence at the Battle of Juan Jacinto. And at that battle, once they win their independence, they actually become their own country. And so they become the Republic of Texas, also known as the Lone Star Republic. Their first president will be Sam Houston, and they fly their own flag with their lone single star as the Lone Star Republic. But over time, Texas actually approaches the United States about annexing the territory. As majority of the citizens in Texas were American citizens, they had won their independence from Mexico, but they wanted to be part of the United States. So in July of 1836, again, is when Texas will have its independence, Sam Houston as their president. The problem with annexation, though, it becomes a debate in Congress. The big issue is the fact that majority of American citizens in Texas own slaves, and this would tip the balance. So this had always been a concern within Congress to maintain a balance between free and slave states. And so Texas coming in as a slave territory would tip that balance in favor of the institution of slavery, and the slave states would have the advantage in Congress. And so this is going to be a heated debate. John Quincy Adams pushes for it to be shut down. He does not want to annex Texas because he doesn't want to see the extension of slavery. John Tyler refused. Okay, Secretary of State Daniel Webster was against slavery, but they're going up against an expansionist president. Also a president who himself is a slaveholder. So James K. Polk is in favor of annexation and continues to push to annex Texas, to the point that in December of 1845, it will become the 28th state of the Union. Now, this is not going to solve matters. This is actually going to anger Mexico even more, because Mexico thought all along that they would be able to reacquire the territory of Texas. But now that it has become part of the United States, Mexico now realizes that they're not going to get Texas back unless they're willing to go to war with the United States. So they recall their ambassador, and inevitably we are headed to war. So looking at the Mexican-American War, again, James K. Polk, he's a warmonger. He wants to go to war with Mexico because it's not only keeping Texas, but he has his sights set on capturing New Mexico with that lucrative trade in Santa Fe, plus being able to take full control of California, as we've had more and more American citizens starting to settle in that territory. So James K. Polk decides to send General Zachary Taylor down to the Rio Grande. This is a disputed border between Mexico and Texas. Texas claimed that their borders ended at the Rio Grande, and Mexico said that Texas borders ended 100 miles north of that at the Nueces River. So General Zachary Taylor is sent by President Polk to the Rio Grande. Now, to Texan citizens, this is Texan territory, but Mexico sees it as theirs. So again, based on perspective, this could be the United States defending their territory, or this could be the United States sending their troops into another nation's territory, a sovereign territory, which of course is going to provoke conflict. Eventually, General Zachary Taylor's troops will be attacked. Another set of troops had started to take hold in California, which again, Mexico saw as a violation of their sovereignty and their borders, and we're not going to let just take that lightly or take it standing. So they ended up crossing the Rio Grande and attacking Zachary Taylor and his troops, where 9 American soldiers were killed. That's all that President James K. Polk needed to get Congress to try to declare war. Congress does not want to declare war, and actually one senator in particular who calls out General Zachary Taylor on his position was Abraham Lincoln, who says, well, wait a minute, were we completely innocent in this situation? He's questioning General Zachary Taylor's position at the Rio Grande. But Abraham Lincoln is of the minority. Majority of citizens want to go with war with Mexico. They want to continue their expansion. And so that is what we're going to do. Majority of the war with Mexico will be fought in California and New Mexico. New Mexico, there actually wasn't really any bloodshed at all. By the time the American forces had arrived in New Mexico, majority of the citizens there wanted to become part of the United States. And so there will be some conflicts in California, but inevitably we will win the war. Again, back in the United States and back in Congress, the debate over the war still was over the issue of sectionalism. At first it's going to be rejected. Texas, is the issue of slavery, another slave state. This would increase Southern power, particularly slavehold power within Congress. The North was opposed. They thought that this war was just a plot to extend slavery and assure Southern domination of the Union. But they will be outnumbered, and of course we will go to war. At the end of the war, we had the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So after we won the war with Mexico, we had to settle the terms. We wanted to gain and maintain control of Texas, but we also gained control of present-day states, portions of California, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. To try to ease the tension between the United States and Mexico, we don't just seize the territory, but we pay for it. So we give $15 million to the Mexican government for this territory. Later on, under the presidency of Franklin Pierce, he will give commissions to a diplomat there, Gadsden, to make the Gadsden Purchase. So territory south of the Gila River, we will pay $10 million for this small portion of land, but this will establish our southern borders. Currently, and as is today, our southern borders in the continental U.S. So brings up the election of 1848. We see a return of Martin Van Buren. So he's as a candidate for the Free Soil Party, wanting to stop the spread of slavery. But the Whig Party is going to have Zachary Taylor, so another war hero. Martin Van Buren couldn't really recover from the issues of being president after Andrew Jackson, so the suffering of the Panic of 1837 and even the forced removal of Native Americans. So is a quick victory for the Whig candidate, Zachary Taylor. He kind of is like Andrew Jackson in a way. He was a great war hero, and he presented himself as a common man. But his presidency is going to be kind of overrun by the gold rush in California. So as we now control California and what is present-day Sacramento, or close to the borders of Sacramento, gold will be discovered in 1848 outside Sutter's Mill. And so where the population in California had only been about 400 individuals in 1848, we're going to see that number increase dramatically to 44,000 by 1850. All moving out to California, hoping to get rich quick. And so this is why many of those moving to California are known as 49ers, because the discovery of gold in 1848 is going to make that rush to California in 1849. So in 1849, they're eventually going to get their number of 60,000 settlers to apply for statehood. So once again, comes up the debate of whether or not California would be admitted as a free state or a slave state. And we will see California outlaw slavery, and as they apply for statehood, it is going to create controversy, and as we will learn, this will start to create the Compromise of 1850. So altogether, guys, this is starting to look at how we created what are the borders of the continental U.S.